Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy from the Central Office, and I'll be your host for today's webinar on the Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. Your microphones and telephones are currently muted to eliminate background noise during the program. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, type it into the question box on your control panel, or if you have a working microphone, raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on the control panel and I will unmute you. Today's program is being recorded and will be available through WebMQS in the Shared Resources section. And I'd like to thank Chuck Schwerin from our Binghamton SBDC for arranging this presentation. And Chuck will introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Kathy. Good morning, everybody. So some of you may not know that we recently moved offices in Binghamton to the new Kaufman Incubator downtown, sparkling new space. And lo and behold, our next door neighbor are folks from the Trade Adjustment Assistance Center who've been in other parts of Binghamton. And Teresa Stockton is the Client Development Specialist for TAAC. It dawned on me that our advisors ought to become aware of what TAAC does, because we represent a lot of clients who have been affected by international competition and may not realize that there are federal funds available to help with reduction in business as a result of competition. So this is something that we really need to have a better handle on, and Teresa is the perfect person to bring us up to speed on that. So without further ado, Teresa, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck. I appreciate that introduction, and for Kathy for the help in setting this all up. Hello, everybody. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about a federal grant program. And before you hang up, because you heard it's a federal grant program, I just want to assure you that it's actually a very easy federal grant to go through. So I'll talk a little bit about this. So again, my name is Teresa Stockton. I've been with the program for 2 years, and I actually go out and network to let people know that this grant exists, number one, and then also to bring people and companies into the grant to get them certified for the grant process. So we'll start today. I'll tell you a little bit about the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Firms program. I'll explain the cost share options for the grant, the types of assistance that are available for this grant, the criteria for certification, and how we would get started if you have a firm that may be interested in applying for this grant. So first of all, we are a federally funded program. We are sponsored by the Department of Commerce and specifically through the EDA. This program provides cost sharing and technical assistance to small and medium-sized manufacturers and service companies who have been impacted by foreign competition. And one of the things that I do try to tell people is one of the objectives I try to overcome is people think, again, federal grant, it's very difficult, or, you know, companies that I'm working with are usually startups and probably wouldn't apply. An example that I do have for you is that one of the firms that we work with was in business for only 2 years. Their first year in sales, they had $1,761, and their second year in sales, they had $700. And I'm sure those are probably numbers that you're used to dealing with, and especially in your startup companies. And they had 3 employees, and they went down to 2 employees. So it's such a small amount, but they were actually a company that qualified for this grant. So don't ever discount who could potentially qualify for it. We're one of 11 regional centers across the nation. Ours happens to be administered by the Research Foundation for the SUNY at Binghamton University. We work with companies out of New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. But if there's companies that actually have parent companies in another state, we can refer them to a different tax center. If they have one of their divisions that are incorporated here, we can work with that group here locally, but we may have to send them out to a different regional center across the nation to get them certified into the program, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later. And our mission, very simply, is to help import-impacted U.S. manufacturing and service firms develop, implement projects to regain global competitiveness, expand their markets, strengthen their operations, and increase profitability and create jobs. So that is our mission statement. Now, who is this for? Who can qualify for this firm, and what do you need to qualify for this grant? So it has been designed for manufacturing and service companies that have been in business for at least 2 years and that they've experienced a decline in sales or production, a decline or impending decline in employment, and those declines have to be due in part to import competition. And this is not an or, it's a decline in sales and employment. So that is something that's very important to remember. Now, what is the grant? What it says cost share options, what does this mean? So there's 2 different options. The first option is a maximum of $30,000 of total project funding. This is the highest cost share percentage available for projects, and it can fund 1 or more projects. The firm who would actually get this grant would pay 25% of the project cost, and the TAAC, us, would pay 75% of the project cost. So what does this mean? So cost share options, how this works is our grant is one of the very, very few out there that is a disbursement grant. Most grants that I'm sure that you're familiar with are reimbursement grants, where the company has to go, they have to, if they're funding a $30,000 project, they have to get the $30,000, and then once certain milestones have been hit, then they get reimbursed for that money. Ours is completely different. Ours is a disbursement grant. So for example, say they want to get a website done for $30,000. The $30,000, the actual firm who won the grant would pay $7,500. We would pay $22,500 of that total project funding. So the nice thing about this is the funding goes directly to the vendor. So the firm, so the 2 advantages for the firm is it's a disbursement grant, so the company doesn't have to come up with the total funding, but they also don't have to worry about tax liabilities because they never see the grant money directly going to them, and then they have to worry about that tax liability. The money goes directly to the vendor of their choosing. So say a company wants to do a website, they pick a vendor, we get a quote of say $30,000, we sign a contract not only with the grant recipient, but with their vendor, and then we pay the vendor in implements. There's got to be certain milestones that are hit. The firm who wins the grant gets to, has to pay their share, and then we pay our share directly to their vendor. So it's sort of a win-win. It's a win for any kind of consultants, which if you are familiar and you're working with consultants as well who are looking for business, this also helps them because we can actually, help them pay or help them with their costs. If they're going out trying to get business, they can say, hey, I know of a grant that could help pay for part of our costs. So I work with web designers who are out there trying to get business, and we can work with them to help, get their clients to help pay for their total project costs. So in a nutshell, you can look at our grant as getting anywhere from 50 to 75% off any kind of knowledge-based service. So the first level of funding, as I just said, is 25 to 75%, or a 25-75% cost share option, where the firm pays 25% and we pay 75% of the project. The next level of funding is a 50-50%, and it's the same type of deal, except for now it goes from $30,001 up to $150,000. We pay 50% of the cost. So it goes down a bit, but we can pay up to $75,000 of a $150,000 project. So the smaller up to 30,000, usually it's one or two smaller projects, where up to 150, you can do multiple projects. And you can even do multiple projects on the up to $30,000 one too. It's completely up to the firm who wins the grant, however they want to spend that money. They can use as many vendors as they want, or they can use one. So now the one thing is, for how you can spend this money is it can be only used for knowledge-based services. So if a firm wants looking at management, marketing, finance, information technology, manufacturing, engineering, or ISO certifications, markings, UL and CE, that's what it can be used for. It cannot be used for any kind of capital equipment. It cannot be used for employee salaries or benefits. So, for example, the next few slides are just going to go through some of the different types of knowledge-based services in these categories. So, for example, in management, our grant can be used for any of the strategic planning, succession planning, recruitment, human resource evaluation, marketing. You'll see, I won't read them all, but strategic marketing, marketing development, website development and optimization is a huge one. We're currently working with a woman right now who actually just won this grant, and she's a woman that does decorative glass. She's looking at hiring digital influencers, which they take her product and make it look pretty and do a blog about it, and so she's actually getting a team of digital influencers to help her business. So marketing is always a very big one that is used for our grant. And then finance, different options in financing. IT is another huge one. We have ERP Systems, Job Boss, E2, that can be covered, any kind of specific manufacturing software, e-commerce, things of that nature can be used, custom programming. Now, they can't go to Staples and buy Microsoft Office off the shelf, because that's something that's not really covered under our grant, but anything that's really geared towards customization for their company would definitely be covered. Manufacturing and engineering, any kind of consultant-based information with manufacturing and engineering. So, for example, if they're going to buy a large piece of equipment, our grant can't cover that piece of equipment, but it can cover the training for that equipment. It can cover the software for that equipment. It can cover a marketing plan to talk about what the new capabilities are for this equipment and things of that nature. Another huge one that our grant is used for quite frequently is ISO certifications and markings, to actually help this company export document and development ISO certifications that need to be updated and things of that nature. So again, that's one that we see quite frequently. So what is it that makes a firm qualify for our grant? And these are just definitions. A manufacturing firm is an entity that makes a good through process involving raw materials, components, assemblies on a large scale with different operations divided among different workers. But again, I told you earlier back on that we had somebody that had 3 employees with $1,700 in sales. So what I like to try to tell people is, don't ever disqualify anybody before talking to me. Please feel free. I'm very readily accessible to, if you have any questions about somebody that may qualify, I'll definitely talk you through it, or they can call me directly. I look at us as a very inclusive grant. We look at different ways, all the different ways to include people or firms versus to disqualify them, and you'll see that more and more as I go through to let you know what you need to qualify for our grant. And then service firms were just added recently within just the last few years, because you think a lot of call centers. I see a lot of people complaining that they can't speak to anybody here in the United States anymore, and that was a big thing where a lot of our call centers left the country. So service firms were added as well, and that's technically a firm engaged in the business of supplying services. So that could open up the door to many, many different companies. Now, the eligibility, a petitioning firm can be pretty much anything. We work with sole proprietors. The woman I just told you about who does the decorative glass, she is a sole proprietor, and she worked with people that were independent contractors. Because again, if you remember, to qualify for this grant, you have to have a loss of sales and employees. Well, she doesn't technically have employees, but she had independent contractors, so we could qualify her on that basis. Other people have temporary or seasonal hiring, and we can qualify people if those decreased over a course of a certain time period. So there's many ways to be able to get a firm to be eligible based on what they are and their sales numbers and employee numbers. The only thing that we cannot certify is a division. So as I said earlier in the presentation, if there's a division here in New York State, we can actually work with their parent company if it's in a different state, or even, believe it or not, a different country. We're actually working with somebody like that now. But as long as they're incorporated in New York State, then the monies can flow through here. So, but if there is, like a company we just worked with had multiple divisions within New York State, we work with a parent company, they got the grant, and then they can put their money within the divisions. We just cannot certify individual divisions. Now, again, what's the criteria for certification? The manufacturing or service firm has to have been in business at least 2 years. There has to be a decline in domestic sales of 5% or greater. And what we qualify as domestic sales is total net sales minus any exports if they export more than 5%, and any resale items. And resale items for us it's very specific. So it's if it comes in and then immediately goes out with any touching, without any repackaging, without any stickers, without any changing at all. And most companies they do some kind of manipulation to their product. So it's a very simple, calculation for their domestic sales. And then also decline in employment. We look at 5% or greater, or imminent threat. If there's WARN notices and things of that nature, we can look at different aspects of that. And these declines have to be in part due to foreign competition. And it's a very small amount. And the example I give is, say for example, there was a company that had $2 million in sales last year and $1 million in sales this year. That's a loss of $1 million. Only $50,000 has to be in part due to foreign competition for them to certify, for this grant. So it's a very minuscule amount. And a lot of people, I think, oh, geez, I don't think I have anybody that would qualify for this grant based on that criteria. You would actually be surprised how many companies actually do meet this criteria. Now, the sales certification, in a little bit more detail, is got to be a 5% decline in the total domestic sales of production for the most recent 12 months period versus the preceding 12-month period. So for example, if I were to work with one of your companies now, I would look at numbers from June of 2015 to May of 2016 versus June of 2016 to May of 2017. And that's how we start. We start with current year versus previous year. And we look for that decline in sales and in employment. Now, if that doesn't work, I'll look at interim numbers. So I'll look at a 6-month snapshot versus a 6-month snapshot for current year versus previous year, all the way up to 11 months. So we'll try to work it that way. And the same thing goes for employment as well. 5% of the firm's workforce have undergone total or partial separation or threat of total or partial separation. And then the definition of total separation means either layoff or terminations, and partial separation means at least 20% reduction in workers and weekly wages or hours. So as I said to you, we try to be as inclusive as possible for this grant. So we work with like I said, we start with current year versus previous year. If that doesn't work, we'll do interim numbers. If that doesn't work, we can go back 24 months or 36 months. If that doesn't work, we can look at production numbers. If that doesn't work, we can look at different for, so a lot of times we'll see sales losses without a problem, but a lot of employers will hold on to their employees for dear life. So we'll see a big decline in sales, but their employees remain the same. If that happens, we can look at hourly wages. We can actually look at import impacted employees. So if they're, for example, getting hurt in production and they take their employees and move them from production to maybe maintenance, we can look at those numbers as well by looking at their payroll reports and things of that nature. So there's so many ways for people, for these companies to qualify for this grant, and I think that's one of the positives, because I think a lot of grants tend to look at ways that you can't qualify, or ours you can look at ways, you know, we look at so many different ways to qualify these companies. Now, what's required? So a lot of federal grants, you need a grant writer, and it's pages and pages and months of work. Ours is very simple. We just look at sales and employment information. So when we ask for this information, we're looking at profit and loss monthly sales numbers, and companies usually just have like QuickBooks or some kind of accounting system that they immediately can generate those forms for us. And then as long as it's a New York State company, we look at their New York State 45s. And all we look for is the cover page for that shows how many employees were employed during the months of those quarters. So we don't want any kind of personal information on employees. We don't want social security number. We don't want wages. We just want how many people were working in the sales, so that we can show that that's where the losses come in. We need a history of the firm, you know, DUNS number. We need their NAICS numbers, you know, who's the president, things of that nature. Very, very simple information. The financial statements, as I had mentioned, the profit and loss for either the current, you know, year and previous year, or if we have to go back the 24, 36 months. And then last but not least, we need some customer information. And I like to talk about the advantages of our grant, which I feel it is a disbursement grant. It is a grant that there's a lot of flexibility in how you spend the money. You can use it for multiple projects. There's no tax liabilities. There's no true milestones that have to be met. So for example, yes, we want you to increase your sales, we want you to increase your employment, but if you don't, there's no penalties on that grant. So those are a lot of the advantages. But one of the objectives that sometimes come about is that we do need to speak to at least 2 to 4 of your customers, of the grant recipients' customers, to tell us that yes, they did go to foreign competition. And because really, when you look at their sales and you look at their employment, that's not going to tell us how they lost the business. I mean, it could just be bad business practice. What we need to do is we need to speak to 2 to 4 other customers that will say, yes, we did go to company XYZ, but now we're going to China, now we're going to Japan, or wherever. And I ask them just a couple simple questions. Number one, are you doing business with company XYZ? What are you purchasing from company XYZ? Are you getting quotes from different countries for the same product? And have you purchased the same product out of the country? And what countries of origins are you purchasing these products? I don't need any identifying information as to who they're buying it from or anything of that nature. But believe it or not, some people will actually walk away because they don't want me talking to their customers. And I do understand it, but I also put a very positive spin on this when I speak to their customers, and I just tell them that, their client is looking to become more globally competitive. They may have lost a quote or two from you, and they want to win that business back, and they're looking to get some grant money to help them with certain processes to do that. So I put a very positive spin on that. But that can be an objection. Also, believe it or not, people don't want to supply me with their financial statements. This grant is we use our financial statements just to qualify them for this grant. We don't use it for any other reason. It is business confidential. It is used, it is exempt from foiling, or I believe from the federal level, it's called FERPA. So nobody can take this information or request it in any way. It's only looked at to just qualify them for this grant. Now, the criteria for the certification for the effects of imports, as I had just mentioned, there has to have been at least increases in imports that have attributed to at least 5% of the loss of sales, and is demonstrated by, the customers reducing their purchases in favor of imported products. Or we can look at quotes or bids that were lost in favor of imported products. And that's where I will speak to those customers and get that information directly from them. Now, how does this all work? How do we go about doing this grant? There's 4 very simple steps. The first step is pre-qualification. So if you call me and say, hey, I have somebody, and I actually have two right here on my desk from the folks here at our neighbors at SBDC in Binghamton, who I need to speak to, some people that they had given me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send them some information to start the process, and it's the firm submits required information and we pre-qualify them. And this is all we do. I send them a blank spreadsheet like this. I call it my pre-qualification worksheet, and this is all blank, and we send this information. And if you look, you'll see 4 tables here, and we'll start with the bottom 2 tables, as I had mentioned, and we're going to ask for all their sales for June to May of this year and June to May of last year, and then we'll have them any kind of export sales above 5%. If they do it, they would fill out the next column, and then it calculates automatically what the domestic sales are. And then I'm going to ask for total employment. And you'll see right there that it's just a very simple Excel spreadsheet. It calculates all the information on the bottom. There's also a second page that I didn't put on here, but it'll also calculate the interim data from the 6-month to 11-month if it isn't a simple year over year. And if that doesn't work, they're going to fill out the top 2 tables, which would be the 24-month or 36-month look back. And usually, like I said, we will see some kind of loss there where we can hit the 5% loss. If not, we can delve a little bit deeper into, like I said, production employment. More or less, production employment is usually impact imported employees. So if they were in production and now because production has lessened, then we can work with those. We can also look at the wages I had also mentioned. That's a little bit more challenging, but it's not like we can't do it. We can still do it, but it's a little bit, we're delving in a little bit deeper by looking at their payroll, because they're now decreasing payroll. And we can also look at, like I said, production as well. So sometimes people, their sales are level, but their production has decreased. They've just increased their sales to try to compensate in other areas. So we can also look at production numbers as well. So once we get this back and we see that they have met the qualification of the 5% loss in sales and employees, then the next step we do is what we call eligibility certification or petition process. So at this point, I only ask for those numbers. I don't ask for any kind of supporting documentation, because I don't ask for that, because if they don't qualify, I don't want to make them go through all that. But once I see that they do qualify, we will have them submit the required documentation, which I said is just profit and loss monthly statements and the New York State 45s. And you'd actually be surprised at how many pre-qualification worksheets I get, and I tell them specifically where I'm going to get this information, and then they send it to me and none of it matches. so I have to, I'm very, very upfront with them with where I have to get it. And usually people are guessing, or they're getting the sales numbers from places where I actually don't know. So those are the 2 things that I have to get. So most of the time people are getting much better at getting me the right information, but usually sometimes it's a little bit of a back and forth. Once we get the information and all the documentation matches like it's supposed to, and I get their history and things of that nature, we submit a petition, and we submit that petition directly to the Department of Commerce, and then they review this petition. There is no cost to certify, and all the confirmation, as I mentioned, is confidential. And typically it takes 1 to 3 months from start to finish, but that can vary. I've done one in less than a month because the people that I'm working with are very responsive. They give me the information they need, the proper information, and we can put in a petition in less than a month. And then there's others that I'm sitting on that have been a year. And that's because they're not getting me the correct information, or it's hurry up and wait. I had one company that I just visited about 2-3 months ago now, and they were very excited and passionate about it, ready to go. They were going back and forth, getting all the questions, so to make sure that they had all the information, and then it come to a dead stop, nothing. And so I'll call and follow up, yep, you're on my list, and then nothing. So I can only do so much badgering. they have to, I'm only as fast as the information that they give me and the quality of information that they give me. But, you know, it really is a very simple process, but I understand that people get very busy. So I do, you know, I do understand that. So typically 1 to 3 months, but it can be much less, or it can be much more depending on the client and how quickly they give me the information I need. So the next step is once they have been approved, and I will just say our approval rate is very, very high at 100% actually. All the companies that we actually have had applied to this program have gotten into it. So we do that because we want to make sure that we go through that strong pre-qualification step prior to knowing that they should meet every objective to be able to qualify for this grant. So if we're putting you into the program, you're going to get approved usually. I can't promise it, but we have a very good rate of acceptance. Once in a while, we'll have a withdrawal because we do try to sometimes put a square peg in a round hole, because sometimes we'll try to work around and outside the box, because when you get a federal manual, it doesn't always address everything. So sometimes we'll try to put in companies that may not fit, and sometimes they'll go through, and every once in a while they won't. But we'll get a withdrawal. We won't get a rejection. And then we do it that way because then if the company doesn't meet the parameters at this point, we can maybe try to have them reapply again. So once they're into the program, the next step is what we call an adjustment proposal, development of the adjustment proposal. We will have my director come out and visit, do an on-site diagnostic review. We'll prepare an adjustment proposal, and basically this is, okay, how are you going to spend this money? You're going to have to now say, okay, I want up to $30,000 or I want up to $150,000. You don't have to make those decisions when you're doing the petition, but now that you're in the program, you have been accepted. Now you've got to say, this is what the level of funding I want, and this is what I plan on doing. And so this document basically is just a formality to say this is how we're going to be spending the money. So we submit this adjustment proposal. There's small costs at this point, and we pay 75% of the cost and the firm pays 25%. And this is just to develop the adjustment proposal. Usually the fees range out of the pocket for the firm is anywhere from $500 to $1,500 at the most is what they pay, and then we cover all the rest of it. And typically 2 to 4 months, again, that's just a number that they throw out there. We can get them done in you know, a month to a month and a half at the most, as long as, you know, we're working with the client and they're getting us the information that they need. And then the last step is now it's project implementation. So the firm can choose their vendor. We do not tell them who they can use. They can use anybody they would like. When I first started this program, I thought, well, geez, how do we know that this consultant isn't going to be scamming them? Well, they're going to be signing a contract with us, which is, you know, we're a division of the federal government. So if there's going to be any kind of scams, they won't get paid by us. So the firm, we sign a contract with the firm who wins the grant and with a consultant, as I mentioned earlier. And once they decide to start the projects, we work directly with the consultants along with the firm, and each of us pay our share as the certain milestones are hit with the project that they decide to do. So again, like up to $30,000 is usually 1 or 2 projects, but they can use as many as they want. They can use 30 vendors at $1,000 a piece. Again, it's completely up to the firm. And then the $30,000, $1 up to $150,000. That's the 50-50 cost share. Again, they can use as many vendors as they want. So now the application process, like I said, there's no cost to determine the eligibility to get into the program. You can apply at any time. This grant has been going on since 1978, so it's been an ongoing one. If anybody follows politics and all, you'll see that the EDA, which is also who we're part of, is actually on the chopping block. But that doesn't mean that we're going away. I guess in the last 34 years that my director has been with this grant, I guess we've been on the chopping block 25 times, and we're still here to talk about it. So the funding is ongoing at this point. If a company decides to apply and they don't make it, they can reapply. So say they don't hit those 5% marks. At this point, they can wait and reapply when they hit it. This is really meant as a one-and-done grant program, so it's not meant to come back multiple times. But say somebody did apply and only spent $30,000, they can come back and apply for that additional $120,000. So, but it's truly meant really for a one-and-done. What we ask for after the grant is completed is we just ask for some sales data and employee data for 2 years, just to show that our grant has been a success with this company. Once they're in the grant program, they have up to 5 years to spend that money, and you know, which again is a lot of time. As I mentioned earlier, there are no true milestones, hard and fast milestones. We do want the company to be successful. We want them to, you know, start to turn around and increase their sales and their employment. But if they don't, again, there's no penalty for that. Also, if you have companies that, say, for example, they're actually doing better now than they were last year, so they're not going to show that 5% loss, but they weren't doing as good as they were in 2013. That's one of the reasons why that look-back period is important. So if they were doing, you know, 10 million in 2013, and then 9 million, 7 million, but now they're up to 8 million this year, so they're doing better than they were last year or the previous year, but they weren't where they were back in, you know, 2013. They can still qualify. So again, if you have anybody that has had some losses due in part to foreign competition, and there's some loss in sales and employees at some point in the last 4 years, you know, please definitely refer them to us, and we'll do everything we can. And even if we cannot help them, you know, obviously your group works, you know, very well with these businesses, and you know a lot of grants, and as do we. I always like to joke around that I'm the Mrs. Claus on Miracle on 34th. If I can't help them, I can hopefully help direct them to other groups that can help them as well, as I know that's what you do as well. Again, the advantages of our grant is because the grant recipient does not receive our grant funds, they have no tax liabilities. The grant funds go directly to the vendor that the grant recipient chooses. You have 5 years to spend the funds. They can be used on multiple projects, and like I said, there's no penalties at all. So that's just sort of a recap of the advantages. And here's my contact information. So I'm very accessible, email or call my office. I work very hard to get back to people within a very short time. And I truly am passionate about helping companies to succeed. And this money, I say, well, it's not big money. It's very accessible money. I also tell people when I first started, I used to say overseas competition, but Canada and Mexico are not overseas, so they are also foreign competition. So keep that in mind. And if anybody has any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Teresa. Does anybody have any questions? You know, Chuck was coming up with some questions throughout the presentation, but you answered all of them. Has anyone, just let me see if I can get a show of hands here from the attendees. Has anyone heard of this program before, or have you worked with any clients that have used this program? If you have, could you either type yes or no into the question box or raise your hand? If you can hear me, can you raise your hand? Oh, good. Thank you, Ellen. No, Ellen, this is new information for Ellen. Thank you, Ellen. Gold star for you. But Chuck,
well, I appreciate, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I appreciate, because this is the way that I get the information out. And that's, I was talking to Kathy prior to starting this seminar, is that, you know, how do I get the information out? And it really is reaching out to, you know, networking with groups such as yourself, because I cannot send a letter or a postcard or call people. It doesn't work that way anymore. So these opportunities are very invaluable to me.
Well, we were glad to have you present to us today, because this is really a great sounding program. And Chuck, if you wanted to jump in and just sort of maybe ask your questions just to reinforce what Teresa presented, feel free.
The only question that I didn't hear about was, is this a permanent program in the Department of Commerce, or is this reauthorized every year? Is this likely to go away? Do you know what the political side of this is?
Yeah, well, like I said, we've been around since 1978. So from a time standpoint of is there any kind of time frame or things of that nature, technically it's an ongoing program. We are contracted now through 5 years, so it was last year that we got contracted for 5 more years. Now, with that being said, and everything that's going on in the political world, I mean, you'll see the EDA, which we're a division of, is actually on the chopping block. But as I mentioned too, that, you know, my director, who's been here for 34 years, he said, out of his 34 years, 26 of them, we've been on the chopping block, and we're still around to talk about it. So, you know, with any grant program, yes, it could disappear, but I would say that being around for almost 40 years is a pretty good track record.
And just to clarify, since this is a one and done, you got one shot as a company. So when you put together what you think you want this grant to be used for, you can have multiple projects. You could do website design and you could do training. You list all the things that you want to get done because you can't go back to the well. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. So really, when I say one and done, it's meant that, so if they apply and they don't hit the qualifications the first time, they can continue to reapply until they get it. But once they get the grant, it is really meant to be a one and done once they have that approval. But if they don't spend all the money, then they can come back and apply for the difference up to $150,000. But it truly is meant as a one and done. But if they spend that $150,000, then there is no going back. But if they spend only a partial amount of that $150,000 and realize, geez, I really wish we had spent more, and they timed out of those 5 years, which that's a long time to spend that money. But if they do, and it's happened, they can come back and apply for the difference up to $150,000. So if they spent 20 of the 150, they can come back and come back for the extra 130. Now, other questions that we get quite frequently is like, well, geez, can I do up to 30,000 because that's a better reimbursement rate? That's a 75% reimbursement rate versus 50. They can, but we don't recommend that. If they feel that they need to spend over 30,000, we recommend that they apply right off the bat for the 150,000. But because there's no guarantee they will get approved the next time around. And then they have to start the process over if they did spend all that money and only contracted for up to the $30,000. So we say right off the bat, if you really think you're going to go over $30,000, go for the 150. But they can do it. But like I said, there's no guarantee that they'll get that extra money.
So if we've got clients who we feel might be candidates for this, what's the best way to get in touch? To do a warm introduction via email to you?
That's fine. Email, call me, anyway, whatever works. But like I said, I'm very responsive. And what I like to do also is, again, because this is business confidential, I can't keep you in the loop once they start giving me sales numbers and employee numbers. I mean, a lot of times you guys have that anyways, but I cannot personally give it to you. But I like to keep you in the loop to say that, geez, Chuck, you recommended, Joe from company XYZ, and he did reach out to me. Or, we're at this point where we just put in the petition for Joe, or Joe got approved. So I like to let people know general information about who you referred to me, because I think that's important. When you make a referral, I feel it's very important, to follow up just so you know where we stand in the process. Or sometimes say, hey, Chuck, Joe was all excited and now I haven't heard from him. Give him a little poke and see if he can get him back into helping him move forward.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's time. I don't know if there's any more questions.
We haven't had any others come in. However, if anyone thinks of any after the webinar, you have Teresa's contact information right there before you, or you can contact me or Chuck, and we can help you reach her too. So thank you again, Teresa, for presenting today. Chuck, thank you for arranging this. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.